This morning I want to ask you the question. Ask yourself, is my life just luck? Am I just left up to, happenstance? Or is God have a purpose for every aspect of my life and everything that happens in my life? Am I being groomed for God's plan and how I fit into that plan? We're in the book of Esther, a book of the Bible where God's name is not even mentioned. It's not even mentioned once, but God's fingerprint is all over it. Many people today believe that life is just a series of random chances, a roll of the dice. You hear the term from them a lot, I was lucky. It was lucky that I wasn't hurt worse in my accident. I was lucky that I met my spouse when I did. I was lucky when I won $400 at the casino. I was lucky when we finally had a child. I was lucky when I finally landed that good job. And on and on. And sadly, it's interesting that sometimes those same people will say that it was luck when something good happened, but they will blame God when something bad happens. Sadly, these people do not have, and sometimes we might be a part of that we really don't have a biblical view of who God is. Or we really don't have a biblical perspective on life. And so it kind of messes up our thinking. We don't understand that God is good. God is all-powerful. God is working his plan of salvation to save his people. God not only created us, but he preserves all his creatures. He's active in all that happens in the world, and he directs all things to their appointed end. And we call that providence. Jeremiah 1:7 says, before I formed you in the womb, and we read this a few weeks ago as part of going through this story. Before I formed you in the womb, before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And we talked about the fact that wasn't just true for Jeremiah, that he was known by God in the womb. God knows all of us. He knits us together in our mother's womb. And speaking to the exiles in Babylon, who have been really most likely feeling pretty forsaken and hopeless at this point, Jeremiah 29:11, God says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And God still has a good plan for every one of his children and a purpose for them. Philippians 2 puts it this way. It is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Now, I hope that we can see today that just as God had a plan and a good purpose for this orphan girl, Esther, that God has a plan and he has a purpose for your life, for you. Well, I'd like us to start with chapter 4 of Esther, how God used a girl who won a beauty contest for a purpose she never imagined. Her name was Hadassah. She was also called Esther, and she became queen of Persia. Esther chapter 4. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square in the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain to her, and he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he is to be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the golden scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. I want to give you some background to this passage in the previous chapters. Chapter 1 of this of Esther begins with the king of Persia throwing this elaborate party. It's a big banquet for all the nobles and the officials, and there was all kinds of food and alcohol and dancing girls and a solid week of partying. And by the 7th day, the king and his guests had been drinking heavily. The scripture says, in high spirits from wine. In other words, it sounds like they had drank too much alcohol. And in this condition, he calls for his queen, Vashti, to come out and parade in front of all of his guests to show off her beauty. She refuses. And so the king gets so humiliated and angry at her response that he goes to his officials and asks what to do, and they say he should make her an example, because otherwise that's how all the wives are going to respond in the kingdom. Now, this was foolish and cruel that what people do, we do some crazy things. When we get angry or bitter, self-centered. But they recommend that she be banned, and then he gets rid of her. And that's exactly what he does. And so he gets rid of Vashti. It must have been something strange, but he just exiles her. And they come up with this idea of having a beauty contest to find a new queen. And that's exactly what they do. It must have been like the show, Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire? But in this case, you didn't have the option of not being involved. If the king's men went out and found you to be a beautiful woman, they could just take you and put you in this contest. And that's exactly what he did. But God uses this circumstance, in spite of what's going on here, by a pagan king. God can use even a drunk husband's foolish actions for his own purposes. Think of it. Imagine that. God can use anyone for his own purposes. Well, to go on with the story, this orphan girl wins this beauty contest. And who would have guessed it? In the book of Esther, we read, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and feature, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So Esther was an orphan, and unbeknown to the king, Xerxes, she was also a Jew. She hadn't revealed that. And we read in Esther chapter 2, beginning with verse 17, now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, sometime later, a royal court official of Xerxes named Haman, he was so honored by the king that he got to issue a proclamation that all the people were to bow down before him when he passed by on his horse or walked by or whatever they rode in, chariot. But Mordecai, the Jew, he refused to bow down to Haman because he honored God. And this made Haman so angry and upset that he plots to destroy not only Mordecai, but Mordecai's race, the Jews. Esther chapter 3, verse 2. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down to pay him honor. See, Mordecai believed in one God, the creator God of the universe. And in Esther 3, 5-6, it says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of only killing Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. And then that brings us to chapter 4, which I just read. Mordecai asks Esther for help. When the Queen Esther learns that Mordecai, her cousin's mourning, she hears that he is outside the gate in the customary sackcloth and ashes, mourning, that he was in deep mourning. She sends her servant, Hathach, to go and find out what the problem is. And in chapter 4, verse 8, we read, he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he took him, and he told him to urge her to go in the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. This edict was to annihilate the Jews. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. So this edict goes out that they have a right, the king authorizes, gives them the right to kill all the Jews and to just take all their property. And that's really the motivation. You know, it's kind of like the President of the United States saying, no, I don't know. That's a bad analogy. But it's somebody in power saying, you know, if you can kill this group of people, then you can have their property. I'll tell you, I'd be scared if I was in that group of people, because what won't people do for money nowadays? And if you thought you could get by with it under the law, who would be safe among those people if they said they can just take your property, if they can kill you? And so this is what Mordecai is fearing for God's people, the Jews who are still in exile. Now, we know that some of the Jews, about 50,000 we talked about, had gone back. But apparently there were still Jews that had stayed behind. And it seems that Mordecai and these other Jews were part of that. So, what does Esther do? Well, Esther shows faith and courage, even though at first Esther was afraid to go to the king. I hope that's what I would do. You know, when you hear of situations where people had great faith, I hear of these Christians who refuse to recant their faith in Jesus Christ and are beheaded in the Middle East. I think, wow, would I have that courage? Would I have that kind of faith? I don't know. I hope I would. I believe God gives us grace and faith as we need it. But that's what Esther is willing to do. She's in a situation that if you went to the king, and it was law, if you went to the king's presence into his inner court without him inviting you to come in, that was just death. You're dead. Unless he put out his golden scepter and said, come in. And she hadn't been invited to go there for 30 days. And so she's reluctant. But Mordecai, in verse 12, it says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. In fact, that shows tremendous faith. He says, God's going to protect his people one way or the other. And God's going to protect the Church of Jesus Christ today one way or the other, people of God. In spite of what's happening with ISIS, of anyone who would attack Christians, that's still true today about God's people, Christians. But here in this situation among the Jews, he's saying, God's going to deliver them one way or the other. But if you and your family, father's family, but if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And then he says this, and who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. He's saying, Esther, do you really think that it was just a matter of odds? Do you think it was just a roll of the dice? Do you think it was just luck that you, among all the beautiful women of the kingdom, were chosen by Xerxes to be his queen? He's really implying, no, God's fingerprints are all over this. Don't you see it? And then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, or night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And then she adds this, and if I perish, I perish. See, that's really the bottom line, isn't it? The bottom line in obeying God always comes down to, are we going to choose our own personal comfort, what's safe for us, what's secure for us, or are we going to choose our life over against obeying God? Now, it's not always that clear. It's not always a matter of death. But you know what? It's almost always a matter of personal comfort. Isn't it? What's more comfortable for me? And I believe that's the way it is in America today. We're not living in the Middle East where it's a matter of your head or your life.